Everyone needs a super zoom lens. It doesn't matter if all your gear is professional, having one lens that does it all is incredibly powerful, especially for travel photography. Sometimes you just don't have the time to change your lenses. Sometimes you don't want to pack a bunch of different lenses. But most people only ever keep one lens on their camera, and these super zooms are way better than your kit lens. Today we're testing the two most powerful super zoom lenses. We have the brand new Sigma 16 to 300 millimeter here, as well as the Tamron 18 to 300 millimeter. Both give you a wider zoom range than any native lens. We're gonna walk you through all the most important factors like the handling, the design, the sharpness, the contrast, the bokeh. But first, the price. The Sigma here is about $700, while the Tamron here is $600. And because the Tamron is a little bit older, you can probably find it used for a little bit less. So the Tamron wins that. For the design, the size and weight seems about the same, but overall, I think I like the Tamron's curvier design a little bit better than the Sigma's design. It's close enough to be a tie. A bigger difference here is the zoom range. The Sigma here zooms from 16 to 300 millimeters. In full frame terms, that's 24 to 450 millimeters. While the Tamron here only goes from 18 to 300 millimeters. Now, both have a huge zoom range, but that difference between 16 and 18 millimeters is a pretty big deal. Your phone is about 24 millimeters, so that's where most of us are most comfortable shooting because that's where most pictures are taken. If you're at a restaurant with friends or something, like, you're gonna zoom all the way back to 24 millimeters. And if you have one of these super zooms, I bet a whole lot of the pictures are taken at the wide end because that's just how photography works. So the fact that the Tamron's widest part is only 18 millimeters, about 27 millimeter full frame, that feels a little bit constricting. It's not that big of a deal though, largely because if you are using this for travel or events or something, your phone covers 24 millimeters, so you could just pick up your phone when you want to take a 24 millimeter shot. And in fact, I found the raw files from my newest iPhone here actually outperformed the Sigma. They had a little bit more detail. It's kind of to be expected because that's a prime lens on the iPhone and the camera is actually pretty good. But of course, whenever you start to zoom in, the Sigma is significantly better. For me, these two lenses are all about range and versatility. So the Sigma going back to 16 millimeters is a huge advantage. Of course, they both go out to 300 millimeters, which is incredible. I find that so useful because 450 millimeter full frame equivalent, that's enough for some light birding. If you want to take pictures of the birds at the feeder or squirrels or bigger animals, you can do that. It's also good enough for sports. And is it the ultimate sports lens? No, it's not super fast. It's not gathering lots of light. So your pictures might end up a little bit noisy, especially if you're doing indoor sports. But can it cover everything from volleyball and basketball courtside things to soccer and American football done on huge fields? Yeah, these totally have you covered. So if you're a parent or something going to your kids' games, these kind of do it all for a pretty reasonable price, and that is the power of it. Now, which of these two lenses is sharper depends on what the focal length is. At the wide end, I found them to be about the same. By the time you zoom into about 100 millimeters, like the middle of the range here, the Tamron was a little bit sharper. But by the time I got to 300 millimeters, the Sigma was noticeably sharper. So if you think you're shooting a lot at the tight end, I think the Sigma is going to be a better choice. And I will say with these lenses, you're often shooting at the wide or the farthest end of the zoom. Sigma wins at both the extremes, and I think that's pretty important. I will say at the long end, the Sigma is about 1/3 of a stop slower than the Tamron. And that doesn't ever stop you from taking pictures. Your pictures will be the same brightness. But if you're shooting with the Sigma, your ISO will end up 1/3 of a stop higher and you'll see just a little bit more noise in the image. Are you ever going to notice that difference? You probably won't. They both produce good results, but if you're often shooting in low light, you might consider the Tamron to be 1/3 of a stop better. Macro photography is when you get as close as you can to a subject, and for this, they were a tie. They both got reasonably close. Neither is a great macro lens. If you do try to get close to something, you'll probably want to zoom in some, because if you try to get close at the wide end, they both actually focus inside the lens. I got so close to what I was focusing on that it was covered in the shadow of the lens itself. You can literally bump right up against whatever you're taking a picture of. Our contrast test tells us how each lens handles sunlight being shined right into it, and that's pretty common. Like if you're shooting sports or travel or events, it's pretty often that the sun will be somewhere in the frame. If you're shooting landscapes, you're often shooting into sunrises or sunsets. Portraits, kind of the same thing. People like to have pictures taken at sunrise and sunset, and sometimes you want them backlit. When that sun shines into any kind of lens, the light starts to bounce around. In our contrast tests, I found both lenses did pretty good for a consumer lens. The Sigma, however, showed a little bit more flaring. Now, flaring isn't necessarily bad. As J.J. Abrams, it can be used to good effect. But for me, I'd rather have less flaring and add it in post if that's an effect that I want. They both had similar amounts of bloom, that sort of glowing white explosion around lights that you see. Bokeh is the quality of out-of-focus parts of the picture, and you usually see it in the form of bokeh balls. You know, at night scenes in movies when the lights behind them become big glowing orbs. The bokeh on these was really similar, enough that I probably wouldn't be able to distinguish it. But as I mentioned before, the Tamron is a third of a stop faster, and thus the bokeh balls were a little bit bigger. So this is a narrow win for the Tamron. So in summary, I do think everybody should have a super zoom lens. They're just great to slap on your camera when you want to walk around and you don't want to carry any extra lenses. And both of these are excellent choices for APS-C users. The Sigma here is $100 extra, and is it worth it? I think it was. It was a tiny bit sharper at the long end, but my favorite part is that it goes back to 16 millimeters instead of just 18 millimeters on the Tamron. It doesn't seem like a big difference, but you will be using that wide end a lot. So overall, I say grab the Sigma. In the comments down below, let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more unbiased reviews of camera gear, tutorials, and much more. Bye. Note that I did this testing with a full-frame Sony a7R5 and a Sony a1. That's because those are the camera bodies that push the sharpness and performance of these lenses the hardest. However, that doesn't impact anything. They each have as much resolution as your APS-C cameras would.